The bell above the door of Grayson's Market jingled as a young girl stepped inside. It was a small-town grocery store, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, and behind the counter stood Edward Grayson, a white man in his late 50s, with a stern face and years of pride etched into his frown lines. The girl, Ava Johnson, couldn't have been more than 16. She wore a faded denim jacket and carried a worn backpack. Her eyes were tired but kind, her steps hesitant as she wandered through the aisles. Edward watched her from behind the counter. She wasn't one of the regulars. He noticed how her hand lingered near the candy display, how she checked prices twice before moving on. In his mind, he'd already drawn a conclusion. When she approached the register with a small carton of milk and a loaf of bread, Edward's tone was clipped. "That all for you?" "Yes, sir," she said quietly, setting the items down. He nodded stiffly, scanning them. "3.15. As she reached into her pocket, a candy bar slipped from her sleeve and fell to the floor. The room went still. Edward's voice turned sharp. What's that?" Ava froze, her cheeks flushing red. I don't know. I didn't." "Don't lie to me," he barked. "I saw you put it in your sleeve." Her eyes widened in panic. "No, sir, I swear. I didn't mean it must have." He grabbed the candy bar, holding it up like evidence. "You kids think you can just walk in here and take whatever you want. Not in my store. I work for a living." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, I wasn't stealing. I was buying food for my little brother. I didn't even notice." "Save it," he snapped. "You can tell it to your parents, or maybe the police." Her voice broke. "Please don't call them. I didn't do anything wrong." Edward folded his arms, his face hard. "Then you won't mind if I check your bag." She hesitated, trembling. Slowly, she opened it. Inside were school books, a few pencils, and a crumpled dollar bill. Nothing else. Edward stared at the bag, his confidence faltering slightly. But his pride wouldn't let him stop. "You could have hidden it," he muttered. "I didn't," Ava cried. "I didn't steal anything." By then, a few customers had gathered near the counter, whispering. A woman with a grocery cart frowned at him. "Ed, maybe let the girl go. You're making a scene." He ignored her. "You can leave the groceries and get out," he said coldly, "and don't come back." Ava's lip quivered as she set the milk and bread down. "Yes, sir," she whispered. Then she turned and walked out into the cold, her small figure disappearing down the street. Edward stood there, jaw tight, his hands gripping the counter. The candy bar still sat there, unopened, shining under the fluorescent lights. That night, as he locked up, he noticed something on the sidewalk outside, a small piece of paper fluttering in the wind. He bent down and picked it up. It was a flyer, folded and worn. Community Youth Fundraiser. Help support local students in need. In the corner was a photo of smiling teens in school uniforms, and one of them was Ava. She wasn't a thief. She was a volunteer. He stared at the flyer for a long time, shame creeping into his chest like cold water. For the first time in years, Edward Grayson didn't feel righteous. He felt wrong. The candy bar was still in his pocket when he got home. He placed it on his kitchen counter and couldn't look at it without feeling his stomach twist. For the first time in a long time, he couldn't sleep. The next morning, Edward Grayson opened the store as he always did, unlocked the door at 7 sharp, flipped on the lights, and brewed the first pot of coffee. But something was different. The air felt heavy, the silence sharper. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, echoed the same thought in his mind. I was wrong. He couldn't stop thinking about the look on Ava's face, the way her voice had cracked, the way she'd clutched that bag like it was the only thing she owned. He'd seen guilt before in thieves and troublemakers. That wasn't guilt. That was fear. By mid-morning, he'd already checked the security camera. The footage confirmed what he'd begun to suspect. She hadn't taken anything. The candy bar had slipped out of a torn sleeve when she reached for her wallet. He replayed the clip twice, 3 times, feeling sicker each time. He turned off the monitor and sat behind the counter, head in his hands. "Good job, Grayson," he muttered bitterly. "You scared a kid half to death over nothing." Later that afternoon, he decided to find her. He closed the store early, ignoring the grumbles from a couple of customers who saw the "back in an hour" sign. He asked around, at the diner, the library, the school. Everyone seemed to know of her, even if they didn't know her well. She's a good kid, said Mrs. Campbell, the school secretary. Always volunteering, always polite. Her mom passed a few years ago. Helps take care of her little brother after school. They live over on Maple Street near the old church. Edward's heart tightened. She doesn't get into trouble? Mrs. Campbell gave him a long, pointed look. Only trouble she's ever had is from people who don't take the time to know her. He thanked her quietly and left, feeling the weight of every word. When he reached Maple Street, he found the house easily, a small, weathered home with peeling paint and a broken porch step. It looked nothing like the brick houses up the hill where he lived. Through the front window, he saw Ava sitting at a small table, helping a little boy with his homework. For a long moment, he just stood there, watching. She looked tired but patient, her voice soft, her hands steady as she guided the boy's pencil. There was no trace of the anger or shame he'd seen yesterday, just quiet strength. Finally, he knocked on the door. Ava opened it cautiously, surprise flashing in her eyes when she saw him. Mr. Grayson? He took off his hat, suddenly feeling much older than he had the day before. Miss Johnson, he said quietly. I wanted to apologize. She frowned slightly, wary. For what? For yesterday, he said. I was wrong. You didn't steal anything. I checked the cameras. It was my mistake. Her expression softened, but she didn't speak. I jumped to conclusions, he went on, voice trembling slightly. And I had no right to treat you that way. I let my assumptions get the better of me, and I'm truly sorry. She looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. It's okay, she said quietly. It's not the first time someone's thought I was troubled just because of how I look. The words hit him harder than he expected. It doesn't make it right, he said. No, she agreed softly. But it's the world I live in. He swallowed hard. It shouldn't be. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the wind tugging gently at her hair. Then she said, Thank you for saying that. He nodded. If there's anything I can do to make it right. She shook her head. Just try to be kinder next time. To the next person like me who walks through your door. He wanted to say more, to explain himself, to promise her he'd do better. But she was already smiling faintly, like someone too young to be that forgiving, yet too wise not to be. As he turned to leave, she called after him. Mr. Grayson? He stopped. You didn't have to come here, she said. That means something. He nodded, unable to speak. That night, Edward sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at the same candy bar that still sat untouched on the counter. He thought about Ava's house, her brother, her Grace. He thought about how easily he had labeled her, and how wrong he'd been. He unwrapped the candy bar, broke it in half, and took a bite. It tasted bitter. He whispered to himself, You can't undo the past, but you can start over. And that's when the idea first formed. Small, quiet, but insistent. Maybe he couldn't erase his mistake, but maybe, just maybe, he could build something better from it. The following week, Edward Grayson sat at the counter of his small grocery store, staring at the ledger in front of him. Numbers, columns, inventory lists. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. The idea that had haunted him for days refused to fade. How do you make amends for a wound you can't undo? Every time he looked at the door, he half expected Ava to walk in again, though he doubted she ever would. He'd wronged her publicly. In a town like this, word traveled faster than truth. He could feel the stares already, people whispering, the way they always did when scandal clung to someone. But this time, it wasn't him he was worried about. It was her. So that evening, after closing, Edward made his way to the community center on the edge of town. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because the flyer he'd found had mentioned it. Maybe because he couldn't sit in his kitchen another night with that same candy bar staring at him from the counter. Inside, the smell of paper and dust filled the air. A few volunteers were cleaning up after a youth tutoring session. And there she was, Ava, packing up notebooks and pencils into a small cardboard box, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She froze when she saw him. Mr. Grayson? He removed his hat again, out of habit and respect. Evening, Miss Johnson. Didn't mean to startle you. She gave a cautious smile. What brings you here? He hesitated. I was hoping to talk. Just a few minutes, if you don't mind. She nodded slowly, setting the box aside. Okay, he cleared his throat. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about you, about how wrong I was. I can't stop seeing your face when I accused you. She shifted awkwardly, not sure what to say. I've lived in this town my whole life, he continued. Built this store from the ground up. I always thought I knew people, could tell who was honest and who wasn't. But I realize now I wasn't seeing people. I was just seeing what I expected to see. Ava's expression softened, her voice quiet. It takes a lot to admit that. He nodded slowly. Not enough. I've been thinking of ways to do something right for once. Something that means more than just saying sorry. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I want to start a scholarship, he said simply. For local students, kids like you. For school, for supplies, for whatever they need to keep going. I don't have a lot, but the store's done well enough to help a few. Ava blinked, taken aback. A scholarship? You'd do that? He smiled faintly. I already started talking to the town council. I want to name it after someone who represents resilience and honesty. He hesitated, then added, I was thinking of calling it the Ava Johnson Scholarship Fund. She stared at him, speechless. It's not charity, he said quickly. It's a reminder, for me, for this town, that a person's worth isn't decided by what they look like when they walk through a door. It's decided by who they are when life tests them. Ava's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Grayson, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, he interrupted gently. That's why I want to. She covered her mouth with her hand, her voice trembling. No one's ever done something like that for me. He smiled sadly. Then it's about time someone did. By the time he walked home that night, the air felt lighter than it had in weeks. The stars above Maple Street shimmered faintly, and for the first time in years, Edward Grayson didn't feel like a man defending his pride. He felt like one finding his purpose, but not everyone in town saw it that way. The next morning, as he stood behind the counter pouring coffee, a customer, Tom Willis, one of the regulars, leaned on the counter with a smirk. Heard you're setting up some kind of scholarship for that girl who tried to rob you. Edward looked up sharply. She didn't rob me, Tom. I made a mistake. Tom scoffed. Yeah, sure. You're getting soft, Ed. That kind of thing just encourages more of them to take advantage. Edward's jaw tightened. You don't know her. I don't need to. I know her type, Tom said carelessly. Her folks don't buy anything here anyway. What's the point? Edward stared at him for a long moment, then said quietly, Maybe the point is fixing the kind of thinking that made me accuse her in the first place. Tom blinked, caught off guard. You serious? Dead serious, Edward said. You can buy your coffee somewhere else if it's a problem. Tom frowned, muttered something under his breath, and left. Edward exhaled slowly, then looked toward the door. The same door Ava had walked through weeks ago. It looked different now. No, he looked at it differently. That evening, he drafted the first proposal for the scholarship fund. He didn't write it like a businessman. He wrote it like a man who had been humbled. This fund is not an act of generosity, he wrote, but of acknowledgement. Because sometimes the greatest lessons come from the people we misunderstand. Ava Johnson taught me that integrity needs no defense, and that change starts with admitting when you're wrong. When he signed his name at the bottom, he felt something shift inside him, a quiet release. Maybe forgiveness wasn't given by others. Maybe it was earned, one honest act at a time. The town hall was packed that evening. The seats were filled with local business owners, school teachers, parents, and students, some curious, others skeptical. A few came just to gossip, others out of genuine interest. Small towns like Brookhaven rarely saw big gestures, and a scholarship announcement from the most traditional man in town was enough to stir everyone's curiosity. At the front of the room, a simple banner hung on the wall. The Ava Johnson Scholarship Fund, Building Futures Together. Edward Grayson sat in the front row, tugging nervously at his jacket cuffs. He'd been through business negotiations, tax audits, and community meetings, but this was different. This wasn't about profit or policy. This was about owning up to something he'd done wrong in front of everyone who'd ever known him. When the mayor called his name, he rose and walked to the podium, the wooden floor creaking beneath his steps. He cleared his throat, glancing briefly at the crowd, and there, near the back, stood Ava, in a simple blouse and jeans, her little brother beside her. She met his gaze and gave a small, encouraging nod. He gripped the edges of the podium and began. I've run Grayson's Market for 32 years, he said. It's been my life's work. I've seen kids grow up, families build lives, and generations shop in the same aisles. I thought I understood people, thought I could judge good character by a look or a word. He paused. The crowd was silent. Turns out, he continued quietly, I was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the room. He took a deep breath. A few weeks ago, I accused a young woman in this town of something she didn't do. I judged her because of my own prejudice, not her actions. And I can't undo what I said or how I made her feel. But I can take responsibility for it. He looked directly at Ava now. I learned that character isn't about pride. It's about humility. It's about being brave enough to admit when you failed someone. He paused again, his voice softening. Ava Johnson didn't owe me forgiveness, but she gave it anyway. That's grace. Something I never knew I was missing until I saw it in her. A few people in the crowd lowered their eyes, uncomfortable. Others looked thoughtful. So tonight, he went on, I'm establishing a fund in her name, not as charity, but as a commitment. The Ava Johnson Scholarship will help students who work hard, care for their families, and contribute to this community, no matter their background. Because talent and kindness don't wear uniforms. They just need opportunity. He stepped back from the podium to applause, hesitant at first, then stronger, building into a standing ovation. Even the mayor clapped, though he looked surprised. Edward's eyes found Ava's again. She was crying, but smiling. After the ceremony, she approached him quietly, her little brother holding her hand. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. You already apologized? He smiled. I didn't do it to erase what I did. I did it so I wouldn't forget it. Her brother tugged on his sleeve. Mr. Grayson, my sister says you're giving money to help kids like us. That's cool. Edward chuckled, kneeling down to meet his eyes. Well, your sister's the reason it's happening. She's the one teaching all of us how to be better. Ava's voice trembled. You don't know what this means to me. We've struggled for so long, but this changes things for so many people. He nodded slowly. That's the goal. And I figure if I'm remembered for anything, I'd rather it be this than a store sign. She smiled faintly. You already are. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the street in gold and rose. The crowd lingered near the steps of the hall, still buzzing about what they'd heard. Some were surprised, others inspired. One of Edward's old friends approached him, shaking his head with a grin. You've gone soft, Ed. Never thought I'd see the day you'd name something after a teenager. Edward smiled. Maybe that's the problem. We've spent too long underestimating the ones who still believe they can change the world. The man chuckled and patted his shoulder. Guess there's hope for you yet. As the crowd thinned, Ava walked beside him toward the corner where her brother waited. The town lights flickered on, one by one. Mr. Grayson, she said quietly, you know, you didn't just build a scholarship. You built trust. He looked at her, eyes soft. No, he said gently. You did. I just followed your lead. They stood there a moment longer, the warm evening breeze tugging at the edges of the new banner hanging across the town hall. It read, The Ava Johnson Scholarship Fund, because every dream deserves a chance. Edward gazed up at it and thought, maybe this is what redemption looks like. Not words, not pride, but something that keeps helping long after you're gone. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly at peace.